And it stopped because governments started promoting all these completely insane ideas that, we can run a modern world economy on the energies that our ancestors used to live primitive lives, wind and sun, which is great. Wind is great. We need the wind, we need the sun, and it's nice to have a little, maybe solar panel here and there, or a wind turbine. But it's a huge stretch to go from thinking that you could have anything close to modern civilization with these energy sources. But we've had governments very actively and strongly promoting this nonsense because these things are very cheap compared to fossil fuels. And they're cheap because, they're worth it. They're cheap because they don't work. They don't provide the energy that you need. You can't have, you can't survive the winter on this stuff. And so, if we manage to reduce people's consumption of fossil fuels, because we convince them that fossil fuels are bad because, they're boiling oceans or whatever the latest buzzword is all about, then you can reduce people's consumption of real fuels, and then that will hide and understate the extent of inflation. And the same thing has happened with food. In the 1970s, as the price of food started rising, all these insane cults were being promoted heavily by government agencies, telling people that no. The meat that is the common food of all humans all over the earth, there isn't a single, there's never been a society that lives without animal products. It's impossible to find. There's never been a third generation vegan. There's never been a society that's vegan. All societies, all nutrition everywhere in the world. And in the book, I get into nutrition in quite some depth, and I get into the work of Weston Price, who's like the Mises of nutrition. This is a guy who traveled around the world and went looking for the ideal Garden of Eden diet, thinking that meat was bad, he did this in the early 20th century. So when many parts of the world were still isolated and they didn't have trade with the rest of the world. And he went and visited very isolated tribes all over the world, trying to find somebody who had managed to live on this perfect Garden of Eden green diet without meat. And he couldn't find anybody. And even when he did find vegetarians, their entire food revolved heavily around animal fats. And the healthier the people were, the more animal meat they ate. So meat is the cornerstone of the diet of the human species at all times and all places. But thanks to fiat and thanks to inflation, we had in the 1970s these insane movements to try and tell people that no, actually meat is bad for you and meat is bad for the planet. And instead you should be eating things that are very cheap to produce, grains, because these things can be produced with mass industrialization. They're basically industrial products. They're not natural food. They're not food for human beings. They're industrial products. And agriculture in the 1970s, and I get to this into detail, focused on moving people toward eating heavily all these industrial products like grains and industrial oils, which are not very price sensitive, because the main, the input into them is heavily industrialized. And so they're not as price sensitive as meat. And so this new massive industrial food push came about in the 1970s. You can't separate it from inflation. And I show a lot of evidence of how it was linked to inflation and how these crazy ideas were promoted because of the inflation. The importance of that, and then, of course, there's a chapter on fiat science and fiat academia and the university and how universities have been completely compromised, which, serves to further these propaganda, whether it's on meat or on carbon dioxide and fossil fuels being evil, and basically to promote all of these insane ideas.